Okay. Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this. My name is Luciana Carvalho. I'm the co-founder and chief marketing officer at Innovator Health, and I'm here to spend about 45 or so minutes talking to you about how you can best manage, or better yet, hack your mental health to thrive in today's world. So a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm the co-founder of Innovator Health. We're a mental health startup whose mission is to democratize access to high-quality mental health care for everyone, but particularly for the younger generations. I pride myself in being what I call a brain hacker, passionate about neuroscience and understanding how our brains work, how humans work, and how to optimize our lives. Also speak and research, and one of my other hats is empowering underrepresented voices through community, access to funding, and mentorship. So today's agenda is jam-packed, and if I apologize in advance if I'm not able to go into so much depth into one of these slides. At the end, I'll share my email and my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me at any point, and I'll be happy to follow up and share these slides with you. But what's very important and what I wanted to emphasize here is that my ultimate hope is that you have very actionable takeaways from this talk, and you're able to go off and better understand how we can navigate through the complexity of mental health and human behavior in the kind of the three-step process that we've sort of put together at Innovator Health. And it starts with awareness, starts with validating and accepting where you are, then moving on to more around kind of self-understanding, reflecting, being able to get into more the nitty-gritty of why you're feeling how you're feeling, and being able to adopt the mindset shifts and take small steps, baby steps, towards changing your behavior and ultimately changing your life. So starting with our awareness, and I wanted to emphasize, if there's anything that you take away from this talk, is that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So please adhere to the first aid rule of put on your oxygen mask before you even dare to put a mask on anyone else. It's something that we, particularly women, tend to forget, as we're primed to nurture and take care of others. But I wanted to give you a little bit of context first, and that's talking about what the World Health Organization identified as a growing mental health epidemic. This is pre-COVID. So bear in mind, depression was the leading cause of disability. There are over 300 million people in the world who are clinically depressed, which is underreported. Then between 14 to 18% of people suffer from anxiety disorders alone worldwide, again underreported. And every 40 seconds, a person is lost to suicide, which is insane. There's been over the last decade a 13% rise in mental health issues. This is again pre-COVID stats. So we're starting to see the stats post-COVID, or we're still living through it. So what we expect is that there will be a mental pandemic and the aftermath of the COVID crisis on the majority of us. 2020, for those of us who are in the mental health space, was and beyond, was somewhat of a turning point. Naturally, people reacted to it differently, as you can see, extroverts versus introverts. There's been, as is with anything in life, there are the negatives and the positives. But what I want to emphasize at the beginning of this talk is that we do have somewhat of a choice. It's important and actually empowering to recognize that you can choose who you are and how you'll face the adversities that come to you, and especially during an unpredictable crisis like COVID-19. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this graphic, but it was widely circulated in the internet, and it's a really interesting one to ponder. Another, thinking about the negatives and the positives, one really interesting benefit of COVID is that we went from being human doings to human beings again. The whole world had to come to a stop, physically, emotionally, metaphorically, and this nicely lends me to talk about this concept of emotional granularity and literacy. Check out the Moodlight team, and particularly if you're working with teams remotely, or if you just want to use it for yourself, it's an incredible tool to be able to self-identify what you're feeling, instead of the I feel bad, I feel good. And this concept is immensely powerful when we're talking about brain hacking, and nicely leads onto the concept of improving our well-being. A fantastic book by Lisa Feldman Barrett states that our brains essentially constructs our emotion. So our brain was, from an evolutionary biology perspective, primed not to think or feel or see, but keep our body alive, hence the fear, flight, or fight mode. So in a way, we can reverse engineer by knowing that our brain is constantly trying to predict, based on our past, what we will feel and what emotions will be taking hold of us. So in that way, we can essentially rewire our brains. Going on to a second mindset shift, which draws upon that, is we can, by getting that emotional granularity, which is really going into the next stage of labeling and naming our emotions. It's important that by doing that, once we recognize what we're feeling, we also understand that it's okay to feel whatever it is that we're feeling, even if it rationally doesn't make sense. It's important that we are kind to ourselves, and we recognize that it is, regardless of what our rational brain might be telling us, it's okay to feel what we are, and actually act to prioritize self-care. This is not a luxury, it's not selfish, it's actually a necessity. And more companies, organizations, and leaders worldwide are recognizing that this is not a luxury. What we've created, which could be interesting for you, it's a free assessment that's it's called the Contributing Factors Matrix. It can kickstart your journey into self-awareness. So we've basically mapped out the entire landscape of holistic mental, physical, and emotional health, taking into account factors like loss of purpose, meaning in life, all the way through to inadequate diet, inadequate sleep, being disconnected from nature, more intense issues like psychological trauma and chronic pain. And essentially, after 12 minutes, you can better understand what is at the root of your levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, and mental health. So moving on from, importantly, gaining that self-awareness, taking a moment to stop and reflect on what is my emotion, what am I feeling right now, what am I thinking, why am I feeling this way, what are the factors that are contributing to what I'm feeling. Now we get into a few actionable tools for resilience. Resilience was named by Arianna Huffington the most important word of 2020. And it starts with the mindset of every adversity, every obstacle, every challenge is also a gift. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow. We can look at uncertainty, chaos, and unpredictability as an opportunity to change, an opportunity to grow. And it starts with acknowledging what you can versus what you can't control. It's a very interesting graph by one of our partners, Rich Goddard, which I can send you a link to his work afterwards. But it's essentially mapping out the macro environment, like the economic landscape, politics. There are things that we can't influence or are kind of out of our reach. There's also the external environment, like other people's reactions, your boss, your coworker. Again, there's not so much that we can do to control them. But importantly, our internal landscape, our minds, we do have some control over. So being able to discern, much like the serenity prayer of, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change. No, I can't quote this well. The things that I can't change, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Very important. Distilling it a little bit further into the art of stillness. One thing that we can take away as a benefit of COVID is also forcefully having to halt, to stop, to reflect. I've heard from a lot of our clients and people in my network have said this was an important time to reflect on, what are you living in alignment? Is this my purpose? Is this the right job? Is it the right partner? Is it the right? Is this the right city that I want to live in? It's given us a lot to think about more on the macro level, and life choices and direction, which is really interesting. It's also important to recognize the difference between the trivial versus the essential. There are so many things in our lives, including the comparison economies of Instagram, which we were sort of, our minds were sort of under the pretense that they were the most important things, and we recognized that actually the most essential things were being close to our friends. It was, instead of being stuck to our phones, actually enjoying face-to-face human contact, which is perhaps what we took for granted beforehand. And then lastly, being able to discern between loneliness and solitude, which is another really, really interesting point to, particularly if you were going through or are going through lockdown by yourself. In the interest of time, I had so much to talk about on those different discernments, but I had to move on. Really nice piece of work that I absolutely love is Neo Purusha with the happiness equation. Actually, well-being is 50% genetics, 10% circumstances, which are not under your control, and arguably 40% that you can control. So my question to you is, if we have 168 hours in the week, and let's say 56 and 56 are divided into sleep and work, what are the other 56 hours to be spent on? What are you spending on? So instead of a practice that you can start applying now is to make a list of all the activities that you do within a week, and map them, categorize them by things that you want to do versus things that perhaps you could do, should do, have to do, and start making a distinction between the activities and things that are giving you fulfillment and passion. Then the really interesting practices that we've been implementing with a lot of people over the last years, having very simple morning, and particularly morning and dinner practices. The lunchtime one is just a fun suggestion, but the morning one, I can take 2 minutes, it can take 5 minutes, it can take an hour, depending on what your preference is. But the important thing is that it's integrated into your everyday life, and perhaps you can anchor it to something that you do every morning, like your morning coffee or brushing your teeth. And it's 3 questions to ask yourself. I will let go of one thing I'm grateful for, very specific thing, not the air that I breathe, but something very specific. Then I will focus on one thing for the day. And at lunchtime, doing a weird hobby or activity, something that takes you a little bit out of your norm, is scientifically has scientifically been shown to improve your creativity overall. And something at the end of your day as a wrap up, ritual, is to intermittent fast tech. Very important these days, particularly as we're on screens all the time. And if you can, weave in 20 minutes of something that is, again, outside of your screen. It can be 20 minutes of listening to music. It can be 20 minutes of being on Clubhouse. Or it can be 20 minutes of reading fiction, but something that is stimulating and makes you grow and learn. Then let's go back to some more around coping strategies around anxiety, stress, which arguably we've all experienced in the last year. So there are three types of anxiety. The toxic one is the one that is the chronic spiraling, the catastrophizing, the asking what ifs, which is the one to be avoided. Then the natural one, it's important to recognize that this is from, again, an evolutionary biology perspective, our bodies were designed for survival. So anxiety is a way of our bodies protecting ourselves. Natural anxiety is when you're maybe going on stage or doing something that you're performing or that's perhaps anxiety inducing and makes you nervous, but it's good anxiety. In that way, it fuels you up so that you can peak perform. Then the spiritual and sacred anxiety is the one that wakes you up at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m. and kind of makes you grapple with the existential questions of life, of why are we here? What are we here to do? Who am I? Very simply, some techniques that are really useful is the Anxiety UK's Apple technique. Feel free to Google it and go into more detail, or reach out to me and I can share some more information on this. But it's 5 simple steps of acknowledging, pausing, pulling back, letting go, and exploring. There's a few exercises in terms of letting go. One very simple one is to literally, when you're getting into that panic mode, heart beating fast, you can recognize the physiological sensations, grabbing a piece of paper and writing down in free flow mode everything that is going through your mind. Just write it down. Write it down. And at the end of it, crumple up the paper and throw it away. Put it out of your mind. And actually this exercise of getting it out, either in written format, or you can talk it into a voice note and delete it, but getting it out of your body is incredibly powerful. And then out of your mind, so sort of putting it to the side. Also creating safe spaces inside maybe your house. I know that this can be a little bit limited, but actually one thing that I've done over the last year is to have a designated spot within my living room. That's my sort of anxiety spot. And whenever I'm feeling really stressed and notice that negative thought patterns are taking hold, or I'm going into spiraling a little bit out of control, going into that spot and basically doing whatever I have to do. If I need to scream, which bear in mind if you have housemates, but sort of using that to kind of let go. And in that kind of metaphorical sense, that space is where you go and release. And then once you step out of it, it sort of stays there. Then changing your reaction and mindset to I must. Try to catch yourself when you say should. So stop shoulding all over yourself and go into more creation mode so that you're not reacting, you're creating. So catching that language that you use to talk to yourself. And lastly, again, intermittent fasting, consciously limit consumption, but particularly of news feeds and social media. I actually limit myself to designated times during the day where I consume socials and the news cycles. Then building onto this, very, very interesting to think about how we can turn the negative self-chatter and any emotions that are popping up from kind of panic, fear, anxiety into positive energy. How you can do it. There's an incredible I think we're all familiar with the freeze, flight, or flight, freeze, fight, flight mode. And there's a Hendricks Institute identified fear, the four Fs. In this case, it's four Fs. There's also faint, and each of them have a melter, which is essentially a way in which you can physiologically alter your state of mind. So actually, for instance, if you're going into flight mode, by simply crunching your fists and putting it down and sort of standing in a kind of a power stance, so grounded, you can sort of counteract. So again, that's a really interesting resource for you to check out. And at the middle of it, the last piece that I wanted to say is that I think is completely underrated, and we sort of forget it as we become older, is the concept of play. Incredibly important to go back to what did you love as a child? What excited you? So coming back to trying to incorporate play into your everyday life as much as possible, even if it is just dancing in your living room. The last piece of the resilience package is practicing emotional hygiene. Emotions are contagious, arguably more contagious than a virus in a way. These are 6 very important questions, particularly designed for leaders, that in both personal and professional lives, that you can ask yourself, what's left unsaid? In the context of home containment, what postponed decision or action is being contained? What am I avoiding? There's really interesting things that you can get to by asking those 6 questions. Moving on, it's also important that on one hand, there's so much that we focus on that is coming from outside of us, but it's also important that we're constantly looking at how we're reacting to things, what is going on within us, and we talked about recognizing your emotions, recognizing your physiological states, but also sometimes, importantly, I always like to say this, we don't have the answers. We're humans, and by being the fact that we're humans, we're not perfect. And we know that as women, we do tend to strive for perfection, particularly if we are mothers and have working careers and are taking care of the household and have partners. We tend to put so much pressure on yourself. So here's a kind reminder that you allow yourself to feel the feelings, to grieve the changes. We are going through a collective, deconstruction of the ways in which our lives used to be. Things are going through this fundamental transformation, and it's important that we let it go, that we feel it, that we cry if we have to, that we give ourselves the space to say that it's okay and to be vulnerable. But one important caveat of this is that we don't let it fester, that we don't stay in that mode. We can release it for 5 minutes, for a day, whatever our process is, but recognize that we shouldn't go into a state of letting it completely take over ourselves. And there is a concept of cognitive distortions. There are 15 recognized or 16 recognizable cognitive distortions. I've named a few of them here. We touched upon the shoulds, the thinking to yourself, I should do this, I should do that, I should blah, blah, blah. Very, very normal, but very, very tricky when it kind of takes hold of us. Paralyzed thinking is black and white thinking. Catastrophizing is the what ifs, is going to the worst possible scenario and not being able to get out of it, which in most, the law of attraction, or whether or not you believe in it, sometimes you actually cause whatever you're fearing the most. Filtering is only being able to see the negatives and completely ignoring the positives. So you can have 9 successes at work, but 1 failure. You only focus on the failure. And ... A lot of interesting concepts here for you to dive into. Now, really interesting toolkits that we've been exploring for resilience, but rather, I don't want to say surviving, I want to say thrive in 2021, is to be proactive, to recognize that our mental and physical health shouldn't be looked at 2 separate things. Actually, our mental health is as much of a muscle per se as is our physical health. And there are ways in which we can start to integrate it into our life. This begins with understanding that we have to take it one day at a time, and there are ways in which, particularly going through the pandemic and everything that we're going through on a macro level, it's important that we recognize that this too shall pass, and we remind ourselves of that. The 3 M's that I want to share with you is 3 things that have been helping me, our team, and everyone who we work with, to sort of navigate this last year. And it starts with movement. It's incredibly important. Human beings are no different from animals. We are hunter-gatherers. We're meant to move. But the ways in which we live our lives today are completely sedentary, particularly now during lockdown. So please weave in movement into your everyday life. This can be my favorite, walking in nature, but ideally just outside, getting oxygen. Even if you are I'm in Berlin right now. You can be in London, you can be in the capital, but just breathing in some fresh air. If you can, go outside first thing in the morning, between 6 and 10, as this is optimal time for you to get UV light, sun rays, which optimizes your melatonin production and actually improves the quality of your sleep over it. So it helps regulate your circadian rhythm. Then the second piece is walking meetings. If you can, turn the meetings that you wouldn't need to share a presentation or necessarily be face-to-face into phone meetings, and encourage your team to go. This is really interesting and really powerful for brainstorming and being creative, and also gets you to move a little bit, obviously lockdown permitting. Then the important thing is meaningful connection, checking in. We all know that sadly, one of the biggest things that COVID has taken away from us is the ability to be with a large number of people at any one time. But thankfully, Zooms and phones and messaging and all kinds of, and house parties and all of those things provide. So please remind yourself to check in. And if someone who you're close to is sort of retreating, also please check in on them to make sure that just hi, how are you doing, really can make a world of a difference. And mindful living. There's so much that I can share on this, but obviously given time constraints, I'll try to stop myself. So much on sleep hygiene that I can share afterwards, but drawing on what I touched upon, being outside in the sunlight, even if it's not sunny. Actually, being outside is what helps. Getting looks. And then breath work. If you are not familiar with meditation or any kind of breath work, that's no problem. Use the typical, a very quick and an easy way of the 4-4-4. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4 at different times. That can, sometimes we forget to breathe properly. So taking breaks in between your day to just sort of regulate and ground yourself. Then release journaling, which we talked about earlier, of sitting down and free flow. Even if you're writing, I don't know what I'm meant to be writing, I'm just gonna keep writing, and just go. For 2 minutes up to 5 minutes can also make a whole lot of difference. Now we're moving on to the last part of our agenda. Like I mentioned, your mind is a muscle. Work it, but let it rest. There's so much to be drawn from sports psychology, from professional athletes who are primed at training in very kind of routinely ways, but also giving their bodies and minds the rest that they need. It's also important that we go through recovery, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, because the corporate world, the startup world, I'm a founder, so hey, live and breathe this. We as a society do not incorporate recovery into our lives, and we know that with the amount of burnout in the world, it's important that we prioritize our recovery. An athlete would not do an all-nighter before an important performance, so neither should you. Now, one nice, interesting way of changing your mindset is to think about how to manage your energy, not managing your time. So there are ways in which you can work smarter and not harder. And that's we can give you some tips here. That's connecting, grounding through connecting with yourself daily. This can be grounding as in doing a body scan, where you take a couple of minutes to literally think of all your body parts, close your eyes if you can, and just sort of focus on them. And you don't need to do anything, just focus on them. If you're short for time and you're in between meetings, just putting your feet on the ground and taking one moment to recognize what it feels like. External mess creates internal mess. So whatever your physical environment is, be aware of it. Prioritize me dates and schedule breaks. I have blocks in my calendar where I say it's Lou time, it's me time, and I prioritize date with my partner. I make sure that it's there. My team can see it. My co-founders can see it. It's absolutely carved out. Doing a proper closure of the day, particularly as now work-life boundaries are sort of creeping into themselves, and where actually the stats show that on average we're working an additional 28 hours a month, which is kind of crazy. So please make sure to close your laptop and have some sort of ritual that's even if you have to just close your laptop and take a lap around the living room, which is your commute. No is a gift. Recognize that everything. There was a really interesting talk that I came across that was talking about this. I won't go into it because it's quantum physics related, but it's essentially saying everything that you say that you don't say no to it's a parallel possibility in life. So just imagine how many things could be happening, how many people could be demanding your time, how many projects, if you don't say no. And actually, starting with the default that I've started to, or I'm still in the process of adopting, my default is no. And then I sit on it for 24 hours. And if I can convince myself if I weigh out the benefits and the pros and cons, and I say, actually, this opportunity would be really good. This project would be great. I actually do want to do this. Then I say yes. It's an interesting hack. Then lastly, whether or not you've had COVID, I have. So it's I know the symptoms can be a little bit scary because they're so random and people feel different things. It's not sort of one size fits all. Important also to recognize what is psychosomatic pain versus symptoms of the virus. And please, please, please don't jump to conclusions. It's one of the cognitive distortions. Now, I just have a few slides left. I'm doing a check for the time. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to support others, as that's a growing concern as much as it is to support yourself. And it's important to recognize that in a way, there is no right way to support others' mental health. If you've done mental health first aid training, there are techniques, there are tools, but ultimately we are signposting, which means we just want to understand a little bit where that person is. Can we get them to open up? And based on what they share with us, we can point them to the right direction. But actually, it's important to recognize that with family, friends, colleagues, if you're a manager, how do you best support others? There's no right way, but there is ways in which you can perhaps think about. I mean, if you're a manager in the work context, there's a lot more. Feel free to reach out to me, as we do a lot of work around psychological safety. So I'm happy to share a lot more resources on that. But very simply, we have gotten into this this way of being, and in which "how are you" is almost like a formal greeting of saying hello. We sort of say, "How are you? I'm good. How are you?" Yes. There's no acknowledgement of this is a real question and I'm actually interested. So there are ways in which you can pick up, arguably a little bit harder now we're remote, but you can still do so and support others, even if you're meeting virtually. Saying things like, "I've noticed you're not as excited about XYZ lately," and sort of giving them the opportunity to share. "You don't seem like yourself today," or "I notice blah, blah, blah." Really start with something that you pick up genuinely. Or, "Is there anything I can help with?" Just put it out there and say, so it's not so much the "how are you?" "I'm good," because that sort of shuts the door. There's also practices in active listening. It's called shush, which is showing you care, having patience, using questions. So open questions, not like yes or no, but just tell me more. Tell me, yeah. Then saying it back, making sure that you're repeating it back to others, clarifying, but don't fall into the trap of trying to offer solutions straight away. Just really be there, really listen. And I'll add to it, don't want to go into, fall down the rabbit hole of talking about suicide prevention, but I will say, if there is someone who is struggling and who is perhaps you might feel like is having suicidal thoughts or dabbling there and really, really struggling, it is actually okay, if not advised, for you to ask, have you thought about killing yourself, or have you had suicide thoughts? It's better to directly address that rather than not. But again, a whole other topic. Then again, touching upon language, very important that we're also being intentional and inclusive in how we approach and how we talk about a term. To use an example, the World Health Organization issued a document that was talking about how we refer to people who've had COVID or have been treated or have recovered, so as to diminish the stigma. And this is applicable to mental health overall. This can be this can make a world of a difference between separation and acceptance. This is a lot of information here, so I will jump over this slide. This is about reducing stress and communications at work. There's some recommendations here on what you can do as leadership, what you can do as a team on 101. So please do reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to share more. I'd like to wrap up by sharing two quotes that have really supported me in my 16 years of recovering from mental health, and in being a founder, in working within tech and tech for good and within the space. And that's, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are, by Anis Nin. Incredibly powerful way of looking at the world. And I always like to end, know that we're just talking about suicidal ideation, but I always like to end with, there really impossible is nothing, to quote a cliche. and the best way to predict the future is to create it. I think we all have the tools inside of us. We are incredibly powerful. I'm very grateful that I was able to be here with you today and share, and that you shared some of your time with me. I hope this was useful. Here are my contacts, my email, our website, and my handle on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Feel free to add me. I'm also a dream coach. I'm a certified dream coach, which is a actionable, 10 steps, very kind of real world methodology based program that is basically turning your beliefs, helping you to really get in touch with your intention, your purpose, making your dreamed reality come true. And I'd love to talk to you, to offer this to all of you out there. And if there's any way in which I can support you, I am here. So have a great rest of day and week, and so wonderful to celebrate International Women's Day with you. Thank you.